Ubar, city of pillars. The heat in the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter of the Arabian Peninsula, is a physical presence. It presses down on the endless rolling dunes, a silence so profound it seems to swallow sound itself. For centuries within this vastness, there existed a whisper, a story passed down by Bedouin tribes and recorded in texts like the 1001 Nights. It spoke of Ubar, Iram of the Pillars, a city of immense wealth built on the frankincense trade, a place of such arrogance that it was swallowed by the sands as divine punishment. It was a fairy tale, a poetic metaphor for hubris, until satellite eyes looked down and saw the faint geometric scars on the Earth's surface that no desert wanderer could ever perceive from the ground. Could a city of such legendary wealth have been erased by the desert's own treacherous nature? The mainstream anchor for the search for Ubar is not a single archaeologist's spade, but a convergence of space-age technology and ancient literature. The key figure is Sir Ranulph Fiennes the explorer, who in the early 1990s partnered with documentary filmmaker Nicholas Clapp and archaeologist Juris Zarins. Their crucial tool was data from the Space Shuttle Challenger's 1984 radar mission, which penetrated the dry sand to reveal paleo features, ancient river courses and caravan tracks invisible on the surface. These tracks converged like spokes on a wheel at a location in modern-day Oman near the Well of Shissa. Here, ground investigation revealed not a city of pillars rising from the dunes, but something more compelling and tragic: the ruins of a substantial fortified settlement built directly over a massive limestone cavern. The evidence suggested a catastrophe was literally baked into the city's foundations. The site at Shissa presents a clear, archaeological narrative of a prosperous and then sudden end. Pottery fragments date activity from as early as 2000 BCE, with the main structures, an octagonal fortress with 8 towers and high walls, flourishing between the 1st century BCE and the 1st century CE, the peak of the frankincense trade. Frankincense, the aromatic resin of the boswellia tree, was worth its weight in gold in the ancient world, used in religious rituals from Rome to Babylon. A city controlling a well on the caravan route from the Dofa groves to the markets of the north would have accumulated significant wealth, justifying its formidable defences. But the limestone bedrock beneath it was cast, prone to forming subterranean voids. The very well that gave the settlement life may have been its Achilles' heel. The discovery seemed to validate the legend's core, a wealthy city punished and swallowed. Excavations showed clear evidence of a catastrophic collapse. Walls had fallen inward, as if the ground beneath them had given way. The theory that has gained wide academic acceptance is that the constant drawing of water from the well combined with the natural instability of the cavern roof led to a sudden devastating sinkhole. The city didn't so much sink into moving dunes as it was consumed by the earth itself in a single violent event. This provides a plausible historical kernel for the later, moralistic folktale of a city struck down for its sins. However, scholars still debate whether this site, unquestionably an important frankincense trade fort, is the mythical Ubar of legend. The name Ubar itself is problematic. It may have been a regional name for a collection of settlements or a people, the people of Ad from the Quranic story, rather than a single city. The site at Shissa is significant, but it is not a sprawling metropolis of marble and gold. It is a practical, fortified caravanserai. The legendary pillars could be a later metaphorical flourish, or perhaps a misunderstood reference to the towers of the fortress itself, or even the towering frankincense trees of the Dofa region. The process of how a tangible, historical trading post transforms over 1,000 years of storytelling into a mythical city of pillars is itself a fascinating disappearance, the vanishing of fact into folklore. A lesser-known, curious detail lies in the very radar data that led to the discovery. Some researchers examining the broader pattern of ancient caravan routes visible from space have suggested a more complex picture than a single city. They propose that Ubar may have been a network, a confederation of oasis settlements controlling different legs of the journey. The catastrophe, then, might not have been the loss of one node, but a systemic collapse of the trade route due to political shifts, the rise of maritime trade via the Red Sea, and gradual environmental desiccation. The sinkhole at Shissa would be a dramatic local finale to a much slower regional fade. This idea asks us to consider that the true vanishing was economic and social. with the physical collapse of one fort serving as a powerful, memorable symbol for a wider dissolution. The story of Ubar, then, is a palimpsest. The deepest layer is geological, a limestone cavern lying in wait. Upon that, the historical layer, a pragmatic desert outpost exploiting a precious resource. Then, the catastrophic layer, a sudden, terrifying collapse that survivors would have recounted for generations. Finally, the mythic layer, a moral parable for poets and storytellers, growing grander with each telling. The city vanished not once but twice, first from the physical world into a sinkhole, and then from history into legend. Its discovery bridges that gap, showing how a civilization's end can be so abrupt and dramatic that it ceases to be a historical event and becomes a warning, etched not in stone, but in story. And in that story we find a subtle curiosity. If the pillars were not of stone, but of smoke, the fragrant smoke of burning frankincense that once traced wealth across the desert, then their disappearance was not into sand, but into thin air, a fate far more elusive and profound. The kingdom of Punt's Ghost Coast. The reliefs on the walls of the mortuary temple of Pharaoh Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri are a riot of life and strange wonder. Carved in exquisite detail, they tell the story of a great voyage south, to a land the Egyptians called Punet or Punt. The scenes are specific, vivid. Egyptian ships are loaded with mounds of aromatic frankincense resin, with ebony logs with sacks of gold. They show the chief and queen of Punt, a figure named Parahu, and his wife, Ati, in a depiction that fascinated and puzzled Egyptologists. Queen Ati is shown with pronounced spinal curvature and stetopegia, a realistic and non-caricatured representation that suggests first-hand observation. The landscape is lush, with domed houses on stilts nestled among tropical trees. This was not a land of myth to the Egyptians. It was a trading partner, a source of luxury and sacred goods. Yet, for all this precise documentation, the land itself has evaporated from geography. Why does a place so central to Egypt's economy and mythology have no confirmed location on any modern map? The mainstream anchor for Punt is unequivocally Egyptian. References span nearly 2 millennia, from the Old Kingdom pyramid texts of Pharaoh Sahure around 2450 BCE to the later records of Ramesses III. The Deir el-Bahri reliefs from Hatshepsut's reign in the 15th century BCE are the masterpiece of this documentation, a propagandistic film strip celebrating a successful commercial and diplomatic expedition that brought back not just goods, but live frankincense trees to be planted in the terraced gardens of Thebes. The commodities listed are consistent: incense, antiu, likely frankincense or myrrh, ebony, short-horned cattle, ivory, gold, leopard skins, and exotic animals like baboons and monkeys. These are the fingerprints of a specific ecological zone, a coastal region south of Egypt, with access to both African hinterland forests and the aromatics of the Red Sea hills. The search for Punt, therefore, has been a grand historical and geographical detective story, with proposed locations scattering like pins across a map of northeastern Africa and Arabia. Early theories, influenced by the mention of Aramata, the incense region in classical texts, placed it in the Horn of Africa, modern Somalia, Eritrea, or eastern Ethiopia. The depiction of the Puntites' physical features, their houses on stilts, and the presence of giraffes and other African fauna in some reliefs strongly support an African location. A significant clue came from the baboons brought back. Modern isotopic analysis of mummified baboons from ancient Egypt, believed to be Punt imports, points to their origin in the Eritrea-Ethiopia region. This scientific data provides a tantalizingly specific anchor in a sea of speculation. Yet, the puzzle is not so easily solved. Other scholars, noting the Egyptians' formidable maritime capabilities and the description of voyages down the Red Sea, argue for a location on the southern Arabian coast, in modern-day Yemen or Oman. This region, the ancient land of Demt and later the Sabaean kingdom, was also a famed source of frankincense. The debate often hinges on the interpretation of the Egyptian word Tanetja, God's land, used to describe Punt. Was this a general term for any distant blessed land of abundance, or a specific geographic title? Scholars still debate whether Punt was a single, fixed political entity or a shifting regional term for the source of these luxury goods, a concept rather than a capital. The Egyptian records give us a vivid portrait of the people and products, but seem to care little for the precise longitude and latitude. A curious and fringe-adjacent detail complicates the search further. Some researchers, looking at climatology and paleobotanical data, suggest that the environmental portrait of Punt, lush, rainy, forested, does not perfectly match the arid coastlines of Somalia or Yemen as we know them today. This has led to a fascinating, if highly speculative, hypothesis. Could the core territory of Punt have been not on the present coast, but on now submerged lands of the Red Sea shelf? During the last glacial maximum, sea levels were much lower, exposing vast coastal plains. As seas rose, these prime settlement areas would have been slowly flooded, forcing populations inland or to fragment. This theory proposes that the lost kingdom of Punt is literally underwater, its harbours and central settlements drowned by post-glacial sea level rise between 10,000 and 5,000 years ago. While definitive evidence is, for now, as elusive as the kingdom itself, it frames the disappearance not as a political collapse but as a slow, environmental erasure. The disappearance of Punt, then, may be a disappearance of identity rather than of people. With the rise of powerful intermediary kingdoms like Kush and later Aksum, and the professionalization of trade through Sabaean and Nabatean caravans, the direct Egyptian trade with the source may have ended. The specific political entity known as Punt to the pharaohs could have been absorbed, its name forgotten as new powers rose and controlled the same trade routes. The goods never stopped flowing. Incense, ivory, and gold continued to reach the Mediterranean world, but the specific romanticized God's land of Hatshepsut's artists faded from living memory into historical record. It became a ghost in the geographical machine, a placeholder for a golden age of direct access and exotic wonder. In this way, Punt performed a final, elegant vanishing act. It ceased to be a place and became purely an idea, a destination that exists only in the rearview mirror of history, forever receding on a ghost coast that no modern map can ever hope to chart. Norte Chico's acoustic pyramids. Along a narrow, arid strip of the Peruvian coast, where the frigid Humboldt Current meets the foothills of the Andes, the wind carries a persistent dry whisper. Here, in the Soup Valley and neighbouring river oases, rise some of the most enigmatic monuments in the world. They are not built of stone, but of millions of hand-woven reed bags, shikras, filled with river cobbles, forming immense terraced mounds. These are the pyramids of Caral, Aspero, Huaracanga, and others, comprising the Norte Chico civilization. Dating back to 3000 BCE, they are contemporaries of the pyramids of Egypt and the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, yet they belong to a world utterly alien to both. This society constructed monumental ceremonial architecture on a staggering scale, but left behind no pottery, no refined metalwork, and crucially, no decipherable writing. What purpose did these earliest American pyramids serve in a world seemingly devoid of the material trappings we associate with complex society? The mainstream anchor for this civilization is the sacred city of Caral, a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the most extensively studied centers of the Norte Chico. Rediscovered and championed by Peruvian archaeologist Ruth Shady, Caral's complex, with its sunken circular plazas, residential quarters, and 6 large pyramidal structures, redefine the timeline of Andean civilization. Radiocarbon dates firmly place its flourishing between 2600 and 2000 BCE, making it the oldest known center of civilization in the Americas. The scale is undeniable. The Pyramid Maya is over 150 feet tall and covers an area nearly the size of 4 football fields. The society that built it was clearly highly organized, capable of mobilizing large labor forces for projects that served a non-utilitarian, presumably religious or social purpose. But the substance of this society baffles conventional models. There is no evidence of widespread warfare, no fortifications, no weapons, no trophies. There is no visual art to speak of, no intricate carvings or vivid frescoes depicting gods or kings. Most strikingly, there is no pottery. The people used gourds and woven baskets. They had textiles, sophisticated fishing nets, and a rich diet based on anchovies and shellfish from the sea and cotton, beans and squash from irrigated fields. This is a civilization that seems to have leapt directly to monumentality, skipping the stages of material development seen elsewhere. Their grandeur was expressed not in portable wealth, but in the reshaping of the landscape itself into immense geometric forms. This leads to the central haunting question: what was the glue that held this society together? Without the iconography of a ruler or a pantheon, without the threat of war, what belief system could command such collective effort? The prevailing academic theory points to ideology and shared ritual. The structures themselves are the answer. The pyramids are not tombs. Excavations reveal no lavish burials. Instead, they appear to be stages for public ceremony. The sunken, circular plazas, often at the foot of the main mounds, are acoustically remarkable. Researchers have noted that these spaces naturally amplify sound, particularly from the platforms atop the pyramids. A person standing or chanting on the summit could be heard clearly by hundreds gathered in the plaza below. This was a society of orchestrated voice, of communal auditory experience. Scholars still debate whether the primary function of these centres was religious, economic, or a combination of both. The widespread finding of spondylus shells, a thorny oyster from the warm waters off Ecuador, symbolising fertility and water in later Andean cultures, suggests long-distance exchange networks were already in place, possibly controlled by a priestly elite based at these ceremonial sites. The distribution of cotton also hints at a sophisticated economic model. Cotton grown inland in the valleys was used to make the fishing nets crucial for the coastal diet, creating a symbiotic relationship between communities. The pyramids, then, may have been the neutral sacred grounds where this essential economic and social reciprocity was negotiated and sanctified through ritual. A lesser-known, curious detail involves not the pyramid's construction, but a potential instrument found within them. At Corral, excavations uncovered a collection of antaras, flutes made from pelican and condor bones, and later from llama and deer bone. These are among the oldest known musical instruments in the Americas. Their discovery adds a profound layer to the acoustic hypothesis. The civilization's monumental efforts may have been dedicated to creating a landscape of sound. Imagine the scene: a procession ascending the terraced mound, the crowd gathered in the resonant sunken plaza, and from the summit, not just speech, but the haunting, melodic breath of bone flutes cascading down over the people. The power wielded here was not of the sword, but of the sensory experience, a shared, awe-inspiring moment of music and architecture fused into a tool of social cohesion. The vanishing of the Norte Chico is as quiet as its existence. Around 1800 BCE, the major centres were gradually abandoned. There is no evidence of invasion or catastrophic collapse. The prevailing theory is environmental. The region is seismically active and prone to devastating earthquakes and tsunamis. Furthermore, shifts in the El Niño Southern Oscillation could have brought catastrophic floods or prolonged droughts to the river valleys, disrupting the delicate agricultural and maritime balance. A society built on ideology and acoustic ritual may have found its faith literally shaken by the earth itself. The people likely dispersed, carrying their knowledge and social models into the Andes, where they would resurface in later cultures like Chavin. The Norte Chico civilization didn't so much vanish as it dissipated. Its monumental husks left behind as silent witnesses to a time when the most powerful force in Peru was not a king, but a collective, resonant note hanging in the desert air. The Varna culture's first gold, on the shores of the Black Sea near the modern industrial port of Varna, Bulgaria, a routine excavation in 1972 for a new factory cable, took a turn that would rewrite the prehistory of human metallurgy. A power shovel bit into the earth and unearthed something that should not have been there, a glint of ancient, untarnished gold. What the archaeologists would systematically uncover in the following years was not a settlement, not a fortress, but a vast, organised necropolis, a city of the dead. The Varna cemetery, dating to approximately 4500 BCE, contained the oldest processed gold treasure ever discovered on Earth, predating the gold of Mesopotamia and Egypt by centuries. But the civilization that crafted these exquisite objects remained spectral. Why did a society that mastered such a symbolic and technical art choose to bury its greatest wealth, not in the halls of the living, but in the silent ground of a single cemetery? The mainstream anchor for this discovery is the cemetery itself and its staggering, unambiguous contents. Over 300 graves were excavated, but the wealth was not distributed evenly. While many graves contained simple pottery and stone tools, a small number, fewer than 20, were spectacularly rich. These contained thousands of intricately worked gold artifacts, beads, rings, bracelets, pectorals, and even a stunning gold penis sheath. The craftsmanship is sophisticated, involving hammering, casting, and alloying. Alongside the gold were other prestige goods: high-quality flint blades from distant sources, polished stone axes, shell ornaments from the Mediterranean, and copper tools. This was a society with established long-distance trade networks and a highly specialised artisan class. The grave, now labelled Grave 43, is the most famous. It contained no skeletal remains of a human, but held a wealth of gold objects, a clay mask with gold accents, and other treasures, a cenotaph, a symbolic burial for a person of immense status whose body was lost. The Varna people are classified as part of the late Neolithic, Chalcolithic Gumelnitsa Karnovo culture, known for its tell settlements, mounds formed by generations of houses built atop the ruins of previous ones. They were advanced farmers, herders, and copper smelters. Yet, the sheer concentration of wealth in the graves, particularly in the absence of any similarly opulent finds in their settlement debris, poses a profound question. This was not wealth displayed in life. It was wealth that performed its function only in the ritual of death. The society appears to have been acutely hierarchical, with a clear elite whose power and identity were intrinsically tied to their ability to commission, possess, and ultimately remove such vast quantities of symbolic capital from the living economy. Their power was demonstrated by its deliberate burial. What happened to this society? There is no evidence of a sudden, violent end at Varna itself. The cemetery was used over generations and then, it seems, respectfully abandoned. The disappearance is part of a broader, continent-wide phenomenon at the end of the 5th millennium BCE. Across southeastern Europe, the sophisticated, settled, tell-building cultures of the Chalcolithic, including the Varna complex, experienced a widespread collapse. Their large settlements were abandoned. The use of copper and gold metallurgy drastically diminished. The complex social hierarchies evident in the Varna graves seemed to dissolve. Scholars still debate whether this was due to climatic changes, resource depletion, social upheaval from within, or the arrival of new populations from the steppe. The result was a cultural reversion to smaller, more mobile, and less stratified communities, a European Dark Age that lasted for centuries before the rise of the Bronze Age. This brings us to a lesser-known, curious detail that moves from archaeology into the realm of archaeometallurgy and speculative interpretation. Some researchers analysing the copper artefacts found in the Varna graves have noted a curious pattern. A significant number of them are not simple tools but prestige objects, large ceremonial axes and hammer axes that show little to no use where. They were symbols of authority. But the analysis goes further. The source of this copper has been traced to mines in the Balkans. The control of these mines and the knowledge of smelting and alloying would have been a source of immense power. Could the elite of Varna have been first and foremost metallurgist priests? Their wealth in gold and copper may not have been merely decorative, but sacral. The act of burying it could have been a necessary ritual to complete a cycle of power, perhaps to appease chthonic deities believed to control the veins of metal in the earth. The civilization's fade might then be tied to the exhaustion of the most accessible ore veins, or a loss of faith in the rituals that turned stone into status. The Varna culture's legacy is one of breathtaking achievement and profound mystery. They stand at the dawn of the age of metals, masters of a glittering technology that would come to define power for millennia. Yet they invested that power not in temples or palaces, but in graves. Their civilization vanished not with a bang, but with a whisper, as the social complexity that demanded such ostentatious funerary displays unravelled. The gold of Varna did not travel forward in time as heirlooms of a dynasty. It remained in the earth, a time capsule of a social experiment that flourished and then receded. In that dark Bulgarian soil, we find not just the first goldsmiths, but perhaps the first clear evidence of a human truth, that the ultimate display of power can sometimes be the deliberate theatrical act of throwing it away. The Nuragic builders of Sardinia, scattered across the rugged, sun-bleached landscape of Sardinia, rising from hilltops and nestled in valleys, stand over 7,000 silent stone sentinels. They are the Nuragi, unique, truncated conical towers built of massive unmortared basalt blocks, some reaching heights of 60 feet or more. Built from around 1800 BCE, during the Bronze Age their number is staggering, one for every few square miles of the island. They are not mere huts or watchtowers, but complex multi-lobed fortresses with internal staircases, chambers, and sometimes entire villages clustered at their feet. The society that erected them, the Nuragic civilization, dominated the island for well over a millennium, engaging in long-distance trade across the Mediterranean. Yet, they left no deciphered writing, no clearly identified royal tombs, and their language is lost. What communal need, what shared anxiety or ambition drove the relentless, island-wide construction of these stone fortresses? The mainstream anchor for understanding the Nuragics is the nuragi itself, and the evolution of its form is a testament to a long, stable, and intensely localized culture. The classic single-tower nuraga, like the well-preserved nurage Arubiu, evolved into colossal multi-towered complexes, like Sunuraxi di Barumini, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. These were not just homes. They were defensible strongholds, community hubs, and likely symbols of clan power and prestige. The construction technique, known as Cyclopean masonry, required sophisticated knowledge of dry stone vaulting and a highly organized labor force. The sheer scale of the building program implies a society structured around kinship groups or chieftains, each asserting its authority and security through the construction of its own towering landmark. The landscape itself became a map of social and political territories, written in stone. Beyond the nuragi, the civilization reveals itself through other enigmatic structures. They built sacred wells, elegant subterranean temples with staircases descending to water sources, meticulously aligned with astronomical phenomena. They left behind thousands of bronze figurines, bronzetti, depicting warriors, chieftains, animals, and intricate models of nuragi and boats. These figurines are a vivid, if silent, narrative. They show a society of hunters, herders, and sailors, with a clear martial elite armed with swords, bows, and distinctive horned helmets. They traded with Cypriot copper, Mycenaean pottery, and Central European amber, indicating they were integrated into the wider Bronze Age world. Yet for all this material culture, their voice is absent. Their language is unknown, and the few inscriptions found from the later periods are in a script still undeciphered. The question of their end is intertwined with the arrival of new powers in the Mediterranean. From around 1000 BCE, Phoenician traders established coastal emporia on Sardinia, like Tharos and Nora. Later, Carthaginian and then Roman armies would come to conquer. The Nuragic civilization did not vanish overnight in a blaze of conflict. Instead, the evidence suggests a gradual process of acculturation and transformation. The inland Nuragi continued to be occupied for centuries, but their inhabitants began to adopt Phoenician goods and styles. The distinct Nuragic cultural package, the specific pottery forms, the bronze figurine style, slowly faded, blending with Punic and later Roman influences. Scholars still debate whether the core of Nuragic society was ultimately absorbed peacefully into these new political systems, or if it retreated and persisted in the island's mountainous interior, its identity slowly dissolving over generations of contact and coercion. A lesser-known, curious detail lies in the very name of the island and a tantalizing thread from classical literature. The ancient Greeks called the island Ichnusa, the footprint, but also referred to its people as the Sardonioi. Some Greek historians, like the 4th century BCE writer Sallust, recorded a tradition that the island was originally settled by a people led by a figure named Sardus, son of the Libyan, North African hero god Mecaris. This folk memory, written down centuries after the Nuragi were built, hints at a possible North African connection in the deep past. More intriguingly, the Nuragics are often cautiously linked to the Shardana, one of the enigmatic sea peoples named in Egyptian records as raiders and mercenaries who attacked the Nile Delta around 1200 BCE. The armour and horned helmets depicted in Egyptian reliefs bear a passing resemblance to those on Nuragic bronzetti. Could the builders of the Nuragi have also been formidable seafarers whose reach extended to the chaos of the late Bronze Age collapse? It is a compelling, if unproven, thread that connects the silent towers of Sardinia to one of the Mediterranean's greatest historical dramas. The ultimate disappearance of the Nuragic civilization is thus a story of cultural submersion rather than apocalyptic collapse. Their stone towers proved too sturdy to vanish. They still define the Sardinian skyline, but the culture that built them, its social structures, its beliefs and its language, was gradually overlaid by successive waves of colonization. The nuraghi were repurposed, abandoned, or became quarries for later builders. The civilization's endurance for over a millennium speaks to a powerful, resilient, and deeply rooted identity. Its fading speaks to the relentless, assimilative pressures of the classical world. The nuraghi remain, not as ruins of a defeat, but as majestic, stubborn fossils of a unique and self-contained world that chose, for centuries, to build its story not on parchment, but in the immutable language of stone. The Lycian cliff tomb engineers. The coastline of ancient Lycia, in what is now southwestern Turkey, is a landscape of dramatic contradiction. Azure Mediterranean waters meet sheer, pine-clad cliffs that rise like shattered walls, and carved directly into these sun-bleached limestone faces are the most eloquent and defiant statements of a vanished people. The rock-cut tombs of the Lycians. These are not simple caves, but elaborate architectural facades, replicating the porches, columns and pediments of wooden Lycian houses, or the inverted hulls of ships, etched with a precision that has defied millennia of earthquakes and erosion. The Lycians flourished here from at least the 5th century BCE, resisting conquest, influencing their conquerors, and leaving behind a unique script and a reputation for fierce independence. Yet their distinct language and identity slowly dissolved into the Greco-Roman world. Did a people who so literally carved their ideals into mountainsides ultimately achieve a form of immortality? Or did the very act of stone-bound commemoration seal their fate as a historical curiosity? The mainstream anchor for Lycian civilization is twofold: their distinctive funerary architecture and their appearance in the historical records of more powerful neighbours. The monumental cliff-face tombs, like the famous King's Tomb in the heart of modern Kalkan, or the necropolis of Mira with its theatrical rows of carved fronts, are unmatched in the classical world. They reflect a profound belief in an afterlife that was a continuation of domestic and social life. The deceased were placed in these high, inaccessible chambers, safe from desecration, with their worldly status displayed for all eternity. Alongside these tombs stand the peculiar freestanding pillar tombs, such as the Harpy tomb in Xanthos, where a burial chamber sits atop a tall, slender pillar, a design found nowhere else. This architectural bravery speaks of a confident, wealthy elite in a society that valued commemoration above almost all else. Historically, the Lycians enter the written record through the lenses of others, yet they manage to retain their distinct voice. They are mentioned in Hittite texts as the Luca, a troublesome people of the coast. They famously resisted the Persian Empire, with the city of Xanthos providing one of antiquity's most dramatic stories of mass suicide rather than surrender. Later, they were absorbed into the Athenian Delian League, then the Persian Empire again, then the Hellenistic kingdoms, and finally the Roman Empire. Through all this, they maintained a remarkable degree of self-governance. The Lycian League, a federal republic of some 23 city-states, with a shared parliament and coordinated defence, was admired by ancient observers like Strabo, and even served as a model for the American founding fathers. They minted their own coins and, crucially, wrote in their own language. This language, preserved on stone stelae and coins, is the key to their mystery and their vanishing. The Lycian script, derived from an ancient Greek alphabet, has been largely deciphered, thanks to a handful of bilingual inscriptions. It is an Indo-European language, but it stands alone, a linguistic isolate with no close relatives. Decipherment has allowed us to read their laws, their dedications, and their funerary inscriptions, giving them a direct voice from the past. Yet, this very act of decipherment reveals the process of their disappearance. The inscriptions show a gradual shift. Early texts are in pure Lycian. Later ones become bilingual, Lycian and Greek. Finally, by the late Hellenistic and Roman periods, the inscriptions are solely in Greek. The language, and with it the unique cultural worldview it encoded, was being supplanted. Scholars still debate whether this linguistic and cultural absorption was a peaceful, pragmatic choice, or a coerced erosion. Lycia's integration into the Greco-Roman economic and political world made Greek the language of commerce, administration, and high culture. Adopting it was a path to advancement. The elaborate cliff tombs gave way to Roman-style sarcophagi and temple tombs. The old Lycian gods were syncretized with Greek and Roman equivalents. The civilization didn't collapse, it transformed. Its elite gradually ceased to be Lycian and became Hellenized, then Romanized, citizens of a wider world. The tombs on the cliffs became monuments to an ancestry that was still respected, but whose cultural context was slowly forgotten. A curious and lesser-known detail lies not in the grand cliff tombs, but in a more humble and pervasive feature of the landscape: Lycian waymarkers. Hundreds of simple stone pillars, inscribed in the Lycian language, have been found along ancient mountain paths and roads. They are not grandiose. They typically record a person's name and a fine incurred for damaging the road or tomb, with the proceeds going to the local league treasury. This mundane bureaucracy, etched in stone along remote trails, reveals a society with a strong sense of collective civic responsibility and the rule of law administered across a rugged, fragmented territory. It shows a civilization that was cohesive and organized far beyond the martial pride of its tombs. The disappearance of this system of justice, replaced by Roman law and Latin, represents the true vanishing of the Lycian spirit, not with the fall of a city, but with the silent obsolescence of a waymarker on an abandoned path. The Lycians, therefore, present a different kind of disappearance. They did not fall to a cataclysm or fade into poverty. They succeeded, by the standards of their time, in integrating into the dominant civilization while leaving an indelible, physical mark on their homeland. Their immortality is in the stone they carved, a breathtaking signature on the cliffs that time cannot erase. But their identity, their language, and the specific societal bonds that those cliff tombs and waymarkers represented, evaporated through the slow, steady pressure of cultural osmosis. They vanished not because they were destroyed, but because they chose, generation by generation, to stop being Lycian. In their sublime, silent tombs, we see not a people erased, but a people who consciously over centuries walked away from themselves, leaving only their magnificent stone shells gazing out over a sea that had changed forever. The Hittite capital's forgotten gates. In the high, windswept plateau of central Anatolia, near the bend of the Kızılırmak River, the ruins of Hattusa sprawl across a rocky landscape. Today, it is a UNESCO site, its foundations meticulously traced, its massive reconstructed walls a testament to archaeological dedication. But for over 3,000 years, this place was a ghost, a name in crumbling Egyptian and Babylonian clay tablets, referring to the capital of a formidable empire, yet its location utterly lost to human memory. The Hittites, a superpower that rivaled New Kingdom Egypt, negotiated treaties with pharaohs and commanded a domain stretching from the Aegean to Syria, vanished so completely that even the memory of where their heartbeat was erased. How could the name and location of a world power's nerve centre simply disappear for over 3 millennia? The mainstream anchor for the Hittite rediscovery is a convergence of decipherment and determined excavation in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Scholars, working from biblical references and Egyptian records mentioning a land of Hatti, began to suspect a lost kingdom in Anatolia. The breakthrough came from clay tablets found not at Hattusa, but at the site of Tel El Amarna in Egypt, diplomatic correspondence in Akkadian cuneiform, the lingua franca of the time, mentioning the Hittite king. Then, in 1906, a German archaeologist named Hugo Winkler, digging at the Turkish village of Boğazkal, then Boğazköy, struck an archive. He uncovered not just a few tablets, but thousands, the entire state records of the Hittite Empire written in their own language. The site was Hattusa. A civilization was pulled, fully formed, from the oblivion of the earth. What emerged was the portrait of a complex, sophisticated imperial power. Hattusa itself was a masterpiece of defensive engineering and symbolic grandeur. Its walls, punctuated by monumental gates like the Lion Gate and the Sphinx Gate, enclosed a vast area of temples, palaces, and storehouses. The Hittites were masters of law. Their law codes are among the most systematic of the ancient Near East, statecraft and military innovation being pioneers in the use of light chariots. Their pantheon was vast, a synthesis of native Hatti gods and imported Hurrian and Mesopotamian deities. Crucially, they were meticulous record keepers. Their cuneiform tablets detail everything from royal annals and treaties, like the famous peace treaty with Egypt after the Battle of Kadesh, to administrative inventories, rituals, and even precise instructions for the training of horses. Given this wealth of documentation, the completeness of their disappearance is all the more staggering. The end of the Hittite Empire is placed around 1180 BCE, squarely within the Late Bronze Age collapse, a period of systemic failure that saw the fall of Mycenaean palaces, the destruction of Ugarit, and the withdrawal of Egypt from its imperial holdings. Hattusa shows clear signs of a violent, fiery end. The city was burned and abandoned. The prevailing theory points to a combination of factors: prolonged drought and famine, which would have crippled the agricultural base and central authority, internal rebellions by subject peoples, and the pressure of migrating groups, possibly the enigmatic Sea Peoples or incoming Phrygians from the Balkans. The empire fragmented into smaller Neo-Hittite city-states in Syria that persisted for a few centuries, but the imperial core in Anatolia was shattered and depopulated. Scholars still debate whether the collapse was primarily external or internal. Was it an invasion that delivered the final blow, or did a weakened, starving state simply implode, its capital overrun by scavengers and migrants in its death throes? The tablets themselves fall silent. There is no last tablet that narrates the fall. The administrative machinery simply stopped. In the power vacuum, new peoples moved in. The Phrygians eventually established their own kingdom in the region, with their capital at Gordion. They had no use for Hattusa's scorched stones or its cuneiform library. The Hittite language, a distinct Indo-European tongue, died out. Their history became not a foundational layer for successor states, but a buried secret. A lesser-known, curious detail involves not the empire's fall, but a peculiar and persistent aspect of its culture: the practice of substituting ritually. Hittite texts reveal a world deeply concerned with omens, purification, and the substitution of objects, or even people, to avert divine anger. If an omen portended the king's death, a substitute king might be installed for a period to absorb the fate. This conceptual framework of transferable identity and destiny is fascinating in light of their disappearance. Could this mindset have extended to the capital itself? Some have speculated, though it remains firmly in the realm of fringe thought, that the abandonment of Hattusa might have been interpreted through a similar ritual lens, a deliberate if desperate act of sacrificing the physical heart of the empire to save its essence or its people. While there is no evidence for this, it highlights how the Hittites' own worldview, so focused on ritual contingency, might have grappled with a catastrophe they could not avert. The Hittites' vanishing act is thus one of history's most profound. They were not myth. They were bureaucrats, diplomats, and generals whose documented existence is richer than that of many medieval kingdoms. Yet, their physical and cultural presence was so thoroughly scrubbed from Anatolia that when archaeologists arrived, local tradition had no memory of them. The gates of Hattusa stood nameless. Their rediscovery is a stark reminder that even the most solid and documented of empires rests on a foundation far more fragile than stone, a foundation of climatic stability, social cohesion, and a continuity of memory that, once broken, can cast the mightiest of kings into the realm of forgotten ghosts. The Sea People's shadow. The eastern Mediterranean of the late 13th century BCE was an interconnected world of glittering palaces, thriving ports, and complex diplomatic ties, bound by the tin and copper of long-distance trade. Then, within a generation, that world came apart. The archives of the Hittite capital Hattusa fell silent. The great port city of Ugarit in Syria sent desperate, unanswered letters to its allies before being consumed by fire. In Egypt, the pharaoh Meneptah, and later Ramesses III, faced a threat unlike any other, moving not as a conventional army, but as a migratory force of unprecedented scope. The inscriptions at Medinet Habu recount in stark relief and hieroglyphic boast how Ramesses III defeated a chaotic coalition of invaders who came by land and sea, the Peliset, Cheka, Shekelesh, Dinian, and Weshesh, among others, groups collectively labelled by modern scholars as the Sea Peoples. They were the destroyers of empires, the catalyst for a dark age. Yet, after their defeats and their scattering, their own homeland, culture, and origins slipped back into the shadows from which they emerged. Were these famed destroyers also refugees, fleeing a catastrophe of their own that history failed to record? The mainstream anchor for the Sea Peoples is, unequivocally, the Egyptian record. the wall reliefs and texts of Merneptah at Karnak, c. 1208 BCE, and of Rameses III at Medinet Habu, c. 1175 BCE, are the only contemporary detailed accounts of these events. They are propaganda, to be sure, celebrating pharaonic power, but they are grounded in a real and terrifying crisis. The Medinet Habu reliefs are particularly vivid. They show distinct warrior styles, feathered headdresses, horned helmets, round shields, and a unique type of ship with high prows and sternposts, unlike Egyptian or Aegean designs. The texts speak of a conspiracy in their islands, of lands being cut off and scattered in the fray. Egypt survived, but at great cost. The pharaohs boasted of throwing them back, but the world they saved was irrevocably broken. The great empires to the north were not so fortunate. The identity of the individual groups has been the source of endless, cautious, scholarly speculation, linking names to later peoples or places based on linguistic resemblance. The Peliset are almost universally linked to the Philistines, who later settled on the coast of Canaan and whose material culture shows Aegean influences. The Shekelesh may connect to Sicily, the Shardana to Sardinia, the Denian to the Danaoi, a Homeric name for Greeks. These connections suggest the Sea Peoples were not a single people, but a confederation of disparate groups from across the Mediterranean world, Anatolia, the Aegean, the Italian peninsula, and possibly beyond. They were not a mindless horde, but a migration of entire communities, with families and possessions loaded onto ships and ox carts, driven by a desperate need to find new land. This raises the central question: what was driving them? The old narrative of piratical raiders seeking plunder is insufficient to explain the scale and the migratory nature of the phenomenon. The prevailing academic theory today frames them not as the cause of the late Bronze Age collapse, but as a symptom and accelerant of it. They were likely victims of a chain reaction of failures. A period of severe, prolonged drought and famine, evidenced by tree ring and sediment core data, would have destabilized societies from Anatolia to Greece. Earthquakes further shattered cities. As central authorities like the Hittite Empire weakened, their control over frontiers and trade routes failed. This created a domino effect. Displaced populations, perhaps from the western Anatolian coast or the stressed Mycenaean world, began moving, clashing with neighbours, and creating further displacement in a catastrophic feedback loop. They were both perpetrators and refugees. Scholars still debate whether the movement was a coordinated assault or a desperate piecemeal flight. The Egyptian depiction of a conspiracy suggests a coordinated threat, but this may be a simplification of a more complex, staggered series of migrations that the pharaonic mind interpreted as a unified enemy. The archaeological record in the Levant shows destruction layers at key sites, but also a subsequent settlement of new peoples, like the Philistines, who brought new pottery styles, architectural forms, and dietary habits. This indicates that for some of these groups, the goal was not just raid, but settle. A lesser-known, curious detail that adds a layer of mystery comes from a single line in the records of Rameses III. After his victory, he claims to have settled the defeated Sea Peoples in strongholds, bound in my name. This policy of using defeated invaders as frontier garrison troops was not unusual. But it hints at a fascinating possibility, that elements of the Sea Peoples were absorbed into Egyptian society. Could their cultural and genetic legacy have persisted, anonymized, within the Egyptian population? Some studies of ancient DNA from later periods in the Levant show an influx of European-related ancestry around this time, providing tentative, scientific support for a migration from the north and west. The Sea Peoples, in this light, did not vanish. They were dispersed, absorbed, and assimilated, their distinct identities melting away within a generation or two in their new homes, leaving only their names on Egyptian temple walls and a profound archaeological puzzle. The shadow of the Sea Peoples, therefore, is the shadow of a systemic collapse. They were the human face of a globalized world unraveling. Their vanishing is twofold. First, the vanishing of their original homelands and identities, lost in the chaos that propelled them outward, and second, the vanishing of their distinct groups after their dispersal, as they were destroyed, enslaved, or assimilated. They left no chronicles of their own, no pathetic fall of their last stronghold. Their story is told only by the ruins they helped create and the boasts of the victors who stopped them. They remain history's ultimate enigmatic catalyst, a reminder that civilizations can be brought low, not only by the might of empires, but by the desperate collective movement of peoples with nothing left to lose. The Garamantes of the Sahara. To stand in the heart of the Libyan desert today, in the region of Fezzan, is to stand in a world of absolute aridity, a landscape of sand seas, scorching winds and relentless sun. The silence is immense. It seems a place devoid of history, eternal emptiness. Yet, beneath the dunes and across the gravel plains, the earth tells a different story. Lines of stone markers stretch toward the horizon. The surface hints of a vast subterranean network. This is the domain of the Garamantes, a civilization that from roughly 500 BCE to 700 CE turned one of the most inhospitable places on earth into a thriving urban agricultural kingdom. They did not live near oases. They manufactured oases, engineering water from the deep past, and then their cities dried up and sank beneath the encroaching dunes. Can a civilization sustain itself on fossil water, and what happens when that ancient finite source is finally exhausted? The mainstream anchor for the Garamantes is both literary and dramatically archaeological. They appear in the works of Roman historians like Tacitus and Pliny the Elder, often depicted as fierce nomadic raiders, bandits of the desert who harassed the frontiers of the empire. This was the view from the outside, from the Mediterranean coast. The view from the air and from the ground in the 20th century revolutionized that perception. Pioneering explorers like Laszlo Almasi and later archaeological surveys using satellite imagery revealed the staggering scale of Garamantian achievement. Their capital, Garama, modern Jerma, was a substantial mud brick city. But their true masterpiece was hidden, the foggara system. These foggaras, known elsewhere as khanats, are gently sloping underground tunnels, sometimes stretching for miles, dug deep into the bedrock to tap fossil water trapped in aquifers beneath the desert. This was not a simple well. It was a complex, labour-intensive and brilliantly engineered irrigation system that brought water by gravity flow to the surface, where it could feed fields of wheat, barley, dates and grapes. The Garamantes dug hundreds, perhaps thousands of these channels, creating a green archipelago of fertility in the desert. They were not passive recipients of nature's bounty. They were hydrological miners, extracting a non-renewable resource with industrial determination. This society became a central power. They built hill forts and settlements, produced fine pottery and textiles, and engaged in trans-Saharan trade, acting as intermediaries between the Roman world and sub-Saharan Africa, dealing in gold, ivory, slaves, and salt. They had a distinct culture with its own language, an early form of Berber, and script known as Tifinagh. They were, by any definition, a classical civilization, but one that flourished in a theatre where survival itself was a monumental feat of engineering. Their success was built on a foundation of water that had fallen as rain tens of thousands of years earlier, during a wetter climatic period, a treasure chest they were steadily emptying. The disappearance of the Garamantes is therefore a slow-motion drama of resource depletion, not a sudden invasion. Scholars still debate the relative weight of factors. Did overexploitation of the foggara system lead to a dropping water table, making the tunnels too deep and costly to maintain? Did a gradual, long-term aridification of the Sahara accelerate the process? Did political instability, or the disruption of their trade networks by the rise of new powers, like the Islamic Caliphate to the east, remove the economic pillar that supported their hydraulic engineering? The likely answer is a combination of all three. The archaeological record shows a gradual decline from around 500 CE onward. Foggaras were abandoned. Settlements contracted back toward the deepest, most reliable wells. The desert, held at bay for over a millennium, began to reclaim its territory. A curious, lesser-known detail that speaks to both their sophistication and their ultimate vulnerability lies in their burial practices. The Garamantes constructed thousands of elaborate tombs, from simple cairns to monumental stepped pyramids, basina. Excavations of these tombs have revealed not only Garamantian elites, but individuals of apparently sub-Saharan African origin buried with honour. This points to a complex multi-ethnic society. More intriguingly, studies of skeletal remains show signs of chronic sinusitis and lung damage, likely caused by the constant fine dust from the foggara excavation and maintenance. Their engineering genius came at a direct physiological cost to their people. This physical toll, combined with the increasing difficulty of securing water, may have gradually eroded the social will and labour force needed to sustain their way of life. A civilization can perhaps endure many hardships, but when the very act of sustaining life becomes a grinding, health-destroying struggle, the social contract can fray. The Garamantes did not vanish in a single season. They faded. Their descendants likely became the nomadic tribes of the Fezzan, their urban and agricultural knowledge slowly forgotten, replaced by the more sustainable, if less ambitious, rhythms of pastoralism. Their cities became mounds of rubble, their fogaras filled with sand. Their story is a profound parable for any civilization. They achieved the impossible by tapping a legacy from a forgotten greener age. But a legacy, by its nature, is finite. They built a kingdom on a mirage made real, and when the last of the ancient water flowed, the mirage dissolved, leaving only the dry stones of their ambition and the whispering sand to tell a tale of brilliant, doomed abundance in the heart of nothingness. The Nok culture of West Africa. In the rocky, tin-rich terrain of central Nigeria in 1928, a team of miners was excavating an alluvial deposit when their tools struck something unexpected. Not ore, but a hardened clay head, a human face with piercing, perforated eyes, elaborate coiffure, and an expression of serene, profound antiquity. This was the first known Nok terracotta, a startling artifact that pulled back the curtain on a culture that had been completely absent from the historical record. In the decades since, hundreds of these exquisite figurative sculptures have surfaced, most through illicit digging, their context forever lost. They depict men and women in ornate jewellery, with complex hairstyles, holding weapons, or afflicted by disease. They are masterpieces of ancient African art, dating from roughly 1500 BCE to 500 CE, yet they appear almost without a civilization attached. Do these stunning sculptures, emerging from the earth without settlements or graves, represent a vast unified culture, or something more elusive, a widespread cryptic cult that spanned the region? The mainstream anchor for the Nok is, by necessity, the sculptures themselves and the painstaking scientific work done to understand them. Thermoluminescence dating has established their startling antiquity, proving that sophisticated artistic tradition and ironworking emerged in West Africa far earlier than previously believed. The sculptures are made of coarse, local clay, built by adding coils and shaped with a precision that indicates a long tradition of ceramic art. The stylized features, triangular or oval eyes with perforated pupils, flared nostrils and parted lips, are distinctive and cohesive across a wide geographic area. They are not crude idols. They are portraits, capturing a range of human conditions from authority and health to suffering and repose. Some figures wear bracelets, necklaces, and beads, suggesting a society with social stratification and aesthetic values. The profound mystery of the Nok is the near-total absence of the society that produced them. Unlike the Garamantes with their cities or the Nile Valley kingdoms with their tombs, the Nok have left almost no traces of permanent architecture. No palaces, no temples, no extensive cemeteries have been conclusively linked to them. What archaeologists have found are the remains of village life: stone axes, grindstones, and, most importantly, evidence of very early iron smelting, furnaces, slag and iron tools. The Nok were among the earliest iron producers in sub-Saharan Africa, if not the earliest. This technological leap suggests a society of considerable sophistication, capable of controlling the high-temperature reduction process. But where did they live? The prevailing theory is that they were likely small dispersed communities of farmers and ironworkers, living in wattle and daub houses that have left no lasting footprint in the acidic soil. Their monumental expression was not in buildings, but in fired clay. This leads to the central enigma. What was the purpose of these terracottas? They are found fragmented, often in secondary deposits like riverbeds or farmlands, far from any apparent ritual centre. Their breakage is systematic, heads separated from bodies, which some interpret as ritual killing of the figures, perhaps upon the death of the person they represented, or as part of a ceremonial cycle. Scholars still debate whether they were ancestral portraits, representations of deities, or figures used in healing rituals. The depictions of disease, such as facial paralysis or elephantiasis, are particularly compelling, suggesting they may have been used in appeals for healing, or as representations of specific afflicted individuals. Without written records or clear archaeological context, their meaning remains suspended, a silent conversation between the artist and a purpose we can only guess at. The disappearance of the knock tradition around 500 CE is as quiet as its emergence. There is no evidence of invasion or catastrophic collapse. The most likely scenario is a gradual cultural transformation. The knowledge of ironworking certainly persisted and spread. The artistic tradition, however, may have evolved into new forms or been supplanted by new religious ideas. Some art historians see a possible stylistic link between the knock and later West African terracotta traditions, like those of If, though separated by centuries and significant stylistic evolution. The knock may not have vanished so much as they metamorphosed, their cultural DNA passing into the broader stream of West African history, their distinct artistic idiom falling out of fashion and being forgotten. A curious and fringe-adjacent detail involves the very manner of their discovery and preservation. The knock terracottas are often found in tin mining regions, and their survival is ironically due to the same alluvial processes that concentrated the tin ore. They were buried in waterlogged anaerobic conditions that preserved them for millennia. This has led to a speculative but intriguing line of thought. What if the sculptures we have are only a fraction, and only a specific type? What if the knock also produced wooden sculpture, textiles, or other perishable art that defined their culture even more profoundly? Our entire perception of them is filtered through the accident of what the soil chose to keep. We may be looking at the clay footnotes of a civilization whose main text was written in materials that returned to dust. This possibility deepens the mystery, suggesting a cultural richness far beyond what we can ever recover, a ghostly presence defined by the durable fragments of its most fragile-seeming art. The knock, therefore, stand as a testament to a different kind of historical presence. They prove that complexity, artistry, and technological innovation can flourish without pyramids, palaces, or parchment. Their vanishing is not a dramatic fall, but a slow fading of a specific artistic and ritual tradition into the landscape. They remind us that history is not only written by the monumental builders, but also by the quiet cultivators and smiths, whose most profound statements were made of earth and fire, and whose memory resides in the scattered, beautiful fragments that still rise inexplicably and hauntingly from the Nigerian soil. The Hopewell Networks. 2,000 years ago, across the vast deciduous forests of what is now the eastern United States, from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, a remarkable phenomenon unfolded. It was not an empire with borders and armies, but a far-flung, shimmering web of shared ritual and exchange now known as the Hopewell Interaction Sphere. This was a world where people living in small dispersed communities came together to build enormous geometric earthworks, precise circles, sprawling octagons, and serpentine effigies that altered the landscape itself. They exchanged materials over astonishing distances: obsidian from Wyoming, mica from the Appalachians, copper from Lake Superior, shells from the Gulf, and shark teeth from the Atlantic. Then, after centuries of this vibrant continent-wide conversation, it quietly ceased. The earthworks were abandoned, the trade routes fell silent. What shared belief, what unifying vision could orchestrate such a widespread exchange of goods and ideas and then simply dissipate as if it had never been? The mainstream anchor for the Hopewell world is the earthwork complexes, particularly those in the Scioto River Valley of southern Ohio. Sites like the Newark Earthworks, Fort Ancient, and the Mound City Group are engineering marvels. The Great Circle at Newark is precisely sub 200 feet in diameter. The octagon earthworks are aligned to the complex 18.6-year lunar cycle, a feat of long-term astronomical observation. These were not defensive structures or the foundations of palaces. They were ceremonial centres, pilgrimage sites built to a sacred geometry that was shared across hundreds of miles. They were places where people gathered periodically, not to live, but to participate in rituals that likely involved the cosmos, the dead, and the reaffirmation of a shared identity that transcended local village life. The material culture found in the associated burial mounds reveals the scope of the network. In a single mound at Mound City, one might find a cache of obsidian spear points from the Rocky Mountains, sheets of glittering mica cut into intricate hand shapes, hundreds of pearls from the Mississippi River, and copper headdresses and breastplates crafted with cold hammering techniques. This was not trade in the mundane sense of commodity exchange. These were ceremonial goods, raw materials transformed into ritual paraphernalia, their value derived from their distant origins and the labour of their crafting. The movement of these objects implies a shared religious or ideological system that gave them meaning. A piece of Wyoming obsidian in an Ohio mound was not just a stone, it was a piece of a distant, powerful world, physically embedded in the local ritual landscape. Who were the Hopewell people? They were not a single tribe or polity. They were many different regional groups, what archaeologists call local expressions, united by participation in this broad interaction sphere. They lived in small seasonal settlements near rivers, practicing a mixed economy of hunting, gathering, and the cultivation of native plants like sunflowers, goosefoot, and maygrass. There is little evidence of social hierarchy in their dwellings. The inequality is most visible in their burials, where a select few are interred with staggering wealth of exotic goods, suggesting the emergence of a ritual elite. Perhaps shamans or clan leaders who mediated the long-distance connections and ceremonies. The end of the Hopewell phenomenon, around 500 CE, is one of the great quiet mysteries of North American prehistory. There is no evidence of invasion, warfare, or epidemic. The prevailing theories point to a slow, internal unravelling. One hypothesis suggests that the adoption of the bow and arrow shifted social focus towards more localised territorial hunting and possibly conflict, undermining the cooperative, wide-ranging ethos of the Hopewell. Another points to climatic shifts that may have disrupted the predictable abundance of natural resources, forcing communities to focus on local subsistence and making long-distance pilgrimage and trade less viable. Perhaps the ideological system itself lost its cohesive power, its rituals becoming empty or challenged by new religious ideas. Scholars still debate whether it was a change in technology, environment, or belief that caused the great network to go dark. A lesser-known, curious detail lies not in the grand earthworks, but in the smallest of the exchanged items, tiny, meticulously crafted panpipes made of copper. Found in Hopewell burials, these are not just ornaments, they are musical instruments. Their discovery hints that the Hopewell ceremonies were not silent. They would have involved sound, specific, perhaps sacred sounds made from materials that themselves had travelled great distances. The act of playing a copper panpipe whose material came from Lake Superior in a ceremony at an Ohio earthwork aligned to the moon represents the Hopewell ideal in its purest form, the transformation of distant matter into local sacred experience. The silencing of these panpipes is, metaphorically, the silencing of the entire network. The Hopewell disappearance is thus a fade-out, not a collapse. The people did not vanish. Their descendants likely became the later Mississippian and other woodland cultures. But the specific, breathtaking project of their civilization, the continent-wide web of ritual exchange and cooperative earthwork building, came to an end. The great enclosures were gradually reclaimed by forest. The knowledge of their astronomical alignments was forgotten. The network dissolved, leaving behind the silent grass-covered mounds as the only testament to a time when a significant portion of a continent shared a dream, written not in stone, but in soil, geometry, and the glint of foreign materials under a moon they all agreed was worth watching. The Picts beyond the wall, north of the Roman frontier of Hadrian's Wall, in the rugged lands that would become Scotland, a people known only by a name given to them by their enemies carved their identity into the living rock. The Romans called them Picti, the painted people. To the literate Mediterranean world, they were savage, fearsome warriors who raided the settled province of Britannia. They left no written histories of their own, no king lists on vellum, no chronicles of their deeds. What they left behind were stones, great, rough-hewn slabs incised with a mysterious vocabulary of symbols, elegant beasts, abstract mirrors and combs, crescent and V-rods, and a strange, step-shaped rectangle known as the Pictish beast. For centuries these symbols defied understanding. The Pictish kingdoms were formidable powers, yet they gradually merged into history, their language and distinct culture fading under new names and influences. Were these enigmatic carvings a sophisticated language, a heraldic system, or a final stone-bound stand against cultural oblivion? The mainstream anchor for the Picts is a combination of external historical records and the monumental archaeology of their symbol stones. Roman accounts, like those of the historian Eumenius in 297 CE, first mention the Picti as a new coalition of tribes threatening the frontier. Later, in the early medieval period, they appear in Irish annals and the writings of Bede as one of the major powers in Britain, alongside the Britons, Angles and Scots. They had kings, fought major battles, like the famous victory at Nectansmere in 685 CE against the Northumbrians, and engaged in complex diplomacy. Their territory, known as Pictland, stretched from the Firth of Forth to the Shetland Islands. By the 8th century they were a Christianized people, building monasteries and carving elaborate cross slabs that fused their native symbols with the new Christian iconography. It is the stones that provide the most intimate connection to the Pictish mind. They fall into 3 rough classes. Class 1, unshaped stones with incised symbols, pre-Christian. Class 2, rectangular cross slabs with symbols and Christian imagery. And Class 3, cross slabs without symbols. The symbols themselves are a limited set, repeated across the landscape, often in pairs. The purpose of these stones has been passionately debated. The leading theory is that they are a non-alphabetic system of communication, perhaps denoting names, lineages, or land claims, a form of heraldry or symbolic contract. A stone with a specific combination of symbols, say a crescent and V-rod over a Pictish beast, might mean this land belongs to the lineage of X. They are a graphic identity system for a society that may have valued visual proclamation over textual record. The disappearance of the Picts is one of the most intriguing processes in early medieval history. It was not a conquest or a genocide, but a political and cultural merger. In 843 CE, according to tradition, a Pictish king named Syned MacAlpin, Kenneth MacAlpin, who had a Gaelic lineage through his father, became king of both the Picts and the Scots of Dalriata. Over the following decades, the kingdom of Alba emerged, which would become the nucleus of Scotland. In this new kingdom, the Gaelic language and customs of the Scots gradually became dominant. The Pictish language, a Celtic tongue distinct from Gaelic, possibly related to the Brittonic languages of the south, fell out of use. Their unique social structures, such as matrilineal succession suggested by some classical sources, were supplanted. Scholars still debate whether this merger was a peaceful dynastic union or the result of longer-term pressures, such as Viking raids destabilising Pictish institutions more severely than those of the Scots, allowing Gaelic culture to fill the void. The archaeological record shows no widespread destruction. Instead, it shows a gradual cessation of the distinct Pictish material culture. The characteristic metalwork and pottery styles fade, and most tellingly, the carving of symbol stones stops. The Picts didn't die out, they stopped being Pictish. They became Scots. A curious and lesser-known detail that fuels ongoing fascination is the discovery of the Pictish ogham. On a handful of stones, most notably the Newton stone in Aberdeenshire, the Pictish symbols are accompanied by inscriptions in ogham, an alphabet of notches used for primitive Irish. But these ogham inscriptions do not translate neatly into any known language. They may represent an attempt to write the Pictish language using a foreign script, rendering them cryptic even to scholars of ogham. This stone embodies the entire Pictish dilemma, a people using a borrowed writing system to inscribe a message in their own dying tongue, next to their own unique, untranslated symbols. It is a monument to a culture caught between systems of meaning, on the verge of a silence that would last over a millennium. The Picts, therefore, represent a vanishing through assimilation. Their legacy is not in ruins, but in the genetic and geographic fabric of Scotland, and in those stark, beautiful stones that stand in fields and museums. They challenge our notion of disappearance, proving that a people can vanish not through extinction, but through a change of name, language, and allegiance. Their symbols remain, a powerful and elegant code that we can perceive but not fully decrypt, a final stone-worded testament from a people who chose, or were compelled, to write their final chapter not in ink, but in granite, before walking into the pages of another nation's history. The Kingdom of Kushan. At the dusty, windswept crossroads of Central Asia, where the caravan routes of the Silk Road converged like arteries of commerce and ideas, a nomadic dynasty from the steppes forged one of history's most eclectic and forgotten empires. The Kushan Empire, flourishing from the 1st to the 3rd centuries CE, stretched from modern-day Tajikistan across Afghanistan and Pakistan into the northern plains of India. It was a realm where Greek gods met Persian deities in the serene face of the Buddha, where coins bore inscriptions in Greek script and depicted kings in heavy nomadic tunics, alongside Hellenistic and Hindu iconography. The Kushans were the vital middlemen of the ancient world, facilitators of the flow of silk, spices and spirituality between Rome, India and Han China. Yet, their sprawling cosmopolitan realm faded, their cities buried by sand and time, their contributions often credited to others. Can a syncretic identity, a brilliant fusion of cultures, survive the collapse of the political frame that held it together? The mainstream anchor for the Kushans is numismatic and artistic. Their gold coins are miniature masterpieces of cultural fusion. A typical coin might show the reigning king like the great Kanishka I on one side, dressed in the practical trousers and long coat of a Central Asian horseman, holding a mace. On the reverse, one could find an astonishing array of figures: the Greek god Helios, the Persian fire deity Athsho, the Mesopotamian Nana, or the Buddha, identified by Greek letters as Bodio. The inscriptions are in a modified Greek script, writing a language of the steppe. This was not confusion, it was deliberate, inclusive policy. The Kushan rulers, descended from the Yuezhi Confederation pushed west from China, understood that to govern their diverse subjects, Hellenistic descendants of Alexander's colonies, Persian Zoroastrians, Indian Hindus and Buddhists, they had to sanctify all pantheons. Their coins were a portable imperial propaganda of tolerance. Their capital, at Purushapura, modern Peshawar, and later at Mathura in India, were centres of immense wealth and artistic innovation. It was under Kushan patronage, particularly from Kanishka III, that Mahayana Buddhism began its transformation from a philosophical sect into a devotional, icon-rich religion. The Gandharan art style, born in Kushan territories, produced the first anthropomorphic representations of the Buddha, blending Greco-Roman sculptural realism with Indian spiritual subjects. The towering Kanishka stupa at Purushapura, described by Chinese pilgrims centuries later, was one of the wonders of the Buddhist world. The Kushans built not just an empire of trade, but an empire of the mind, where ideas moved as freely as goods. The disappearance of the Kushan Empire is a process of erosion from multiple sides. By the 3rd century CE, the empire began to fragment. The direct cause was the rise of a new, expansionist Persian power, the Sasanian Empire. From the west, the Sasanians conquered the western half of the Kushan realm, reducing the once great kings to subordinate Kushanshas. From the south and east, powerful Indian dynasties like the Guptas began to reclaim territory. The final blow likely came from the north, new nomadic confederations such as the Kidarites and later the Hephthalites, White Huns, sweeping down from the steppe, repeating the very pattern of migration that had brought the Kushans to power centuries earlier. Their heartland in Bactria and Gandhara was overrun, its cities sacked and trade routes disrupted. Scholars still debate whether the Kushan collapse was primarily due to external military pressure or internal decay. The very syncretism that was their strength may have become a weakness in the end. Did a sprawling, diverse empire held together by the personality of its kings and the flow of silver lack the deep cultural ethnic cohesion to withstand sustained crisis? As the central authority weakened, the various cultural components of the empire likely reasserted their independence, leaving the hybrid Kushan identity with no soil in which to root. The political entity dissolved, and its unique, blended culture fragmented back into its source components or was absorbed by the successors. A curious, lesser-known detail that speaks to their profound influence and subsequent obscurity is the Rabatak inscription. Discovered in Afghanistan in 1993, this text in the Bactrian language, written in Greek script, is a royal proclamation of Kanishka III. It lists the cities under his rule and, crucially, confirms the Kushan pantheon of gods, which included Greek, Persian and Indian deities. This single stone slab is a Rosetta Stone for Kushan ideology. Yet, its modern discovery also highlights how completely the Kushan narrative was buried. For centuries, their history was pieced together from coins and foreign accounts. Their own voice was literally lost under the Afghan soil. Their vanishing was so thorough that their most important royal inscription had to wait nearly 2 millennia to be heard. The Kushan Empire therefore vanished in layers. First, its political power was carved up by rivals. Then its physical cities were abandoned to the desert and the plough, Finally, its memory was subsumed, its Buddhist art attributed to Greco-Buddhist tradition, its role on the Silk Road overshadowed by Rome and China. They became a ghost in the interstices of history. Yet their legacy is undeniable, in the serene Gandharan Buddhas that would influence art across Asia, in the model of religious tolerance and cultural patronage, and in the fact that for 2 crucial centuries they were the steady hand that held the silk, allowing the ancient world to converse with itself. Their empire was a magnificent, fleeting synthesis, proof that at the crossroads of the world something entirely new can be born, and that when the crossroads change, that new thing can dissolve back into the currents from which it came. The Srivijayan invisible thalassocracy. From the 7th to the 13th centuries CE, the strategic Strait of Malacca, the narrow funnel between the Malay Peninsula and the island of Sumatra, was not a lawless passage. It was the controlled heart of a maritime empire that wielded power not through the sword alone, but through diplomacy, spiritual authority, and mastery of the monsoon winds. This was Srivijaya, a thalassocracy, or sea-state, whose influence stretched across modern Indonesia, Malaysia, and southern Thailand. It commanded the vital spice trade between China and India, growing wealthy beyond measure. Yet, for centuries, Srivijaya was a phantom in historiography, mentioned in Chinese chronicles and Arab travelogues, but leaving almost no stone ruins on its home soil. How does a maritime empire that could project power across thousands of miles of ocean leave behind so little for the archaeologists' trowel to find? The mainstream anchor for Srivijaya is, ironically, the testimony of outsiders and the scattered, potent inscriptions it left on stone pillars known as prasasti. Chinese records from the Tang dynasty onward meticulously describe Sanfoki as a powerful kingdom, sending regular diplomatic missions. The esteemed Buddhist pilgrim Yijing, in the 7th century, stayed for months in Srivijaya's capital to study Sanskrit grammar before sailing to India, praising it as a major centre of Buddhist scholarship. Arab and Persian traders, like the 10th century chronicler Abu Zayd Hassan, wrote of the Maharaja of Zabag, who ruled over countless islands, and whose wealth was such that he would throw a ceremonial gold brick into a river lagoon every year to signify his domain's boundless prosperity. These accounts painted a picture of a formidable, cultured and wealthy power. The physical evidence, however, is ephemeral by the standards of contemporary empires like the Khmer or the Chinese. Srivijaya's presumed capital, near modern Palembang on Sumatra, was built in a swampy riverine environment. Its architecture was of timber, bamboo, and thatch, materials that rot swiftly in the tropical climate. What endured were the stone prasasti. Written in Old Malay using the Palava script, these inscriptions are not grandiose chronicles of kings, but public pronouncements of royal edicts. The famous Telaga Batu inscription, for instance, is a stone carved with a 7-headed naga serpent, over which vassals and officials would pour water and drink, swearing oaths of loyalty to the king. It is a stone embodiment of a political contract, revealing a state that governed through ritual allegiance and control of trade, not territorial occupation. Srivijaya's power derived from a sophisticated understanding of maritime geography and political economy. It did not seek to conquer vast inland territories. Instead, it controlled key coastal entrepôts, rivermouth ports that could be reached by seagoing dhow and rivercraft. From these ports, it monopolized the trade in forest and sea products, camphor, sandalwood, cloves, nutmeg, and most importantly, gold. It provided safe harbours, warehousing, and diplomatic services for foreign merchants. In return, it exacted taxes and tariffs. Its kings presented themselves as Chakravartin, universal monarchs, and patrons of Mahayana Buddhism, attracting scholars and monks, which in turn made their ports desirable stops for the pious and the mercantile alike. The state was a network, its power flowing along sea lanes. The disappearance of Srivijaya is a slow unravelling of this network. Scholars still debate the precise causes, but a combination of factors is evident. From the 11th century, it faced relentless maritime raids from the Chola Empire of southern India, which sought to break Srivijayan control of the strait. These raids, while not permanent conquests, weakened its prestige and military hold. Simultaneously, the silting of the Musi River may have hampered access to Palembang. New, competitive ports arose elsewhere in the archipelago. Perhaps most significantly, the pattern of long-distance trade began to change. The rise of direct China-Arabia trade routes and later the Mongol-led Pax Mongolica may have diminished the strategic necessity of the Srivijayan entrepôt system. Its economic raison d'être faded. A curious, lesser-known detail that fuels both mystery and understanding is the legend of the Pamalayu expedition. In the late 13th century, the Javanese king Kertanagara of Singasari launched a major naval campaign towards Sumatra, known as the Pamalayu, or War Against the Malays. While its immediate outcome is debated, it signals a decisive shift in the archipelago's balance of power, from Sumatran to Javanese hegemony. This event, straddling history and legend, marks the final eclipse of Srivijaya by the rising power of what would become the Majapahit Empire. The thalassocracy didn't collapse in a day. Its authority was incrementally stripped away by rivals who learned and improved upon its own maritime model, until its network was simply bypassed and absorbed. Srivijaya's vanishing act is thus the ultimate testament to the nature of a sea power. When its control of the choke point slipped, when its economic logic was undermined, and when its ritual authority was challenged, there were no great stone citadels to mark its fall. The wooden palaces rotted, the royal lineage faded or merged with others, and the capital reverted to a quiet river town. The empire dissolved back into the water and the jungle from which it sprang. Its legacy is not in ruins, but in the linguistic and cultural diffusion across the Malay world, in the model of maritime statecraft it perfected, and in the lingering title of Sriwijaya that still echoes in modern Indonesia as a symbol of a golden age that was for centuries as invisible and pervasive as the wind in its own sails. The Mississippian city of Cahokia. Across the floodplain of the Mississippi River, opposite modern-day St. Louis, a city of earth and wood once pulsed with a life that rivaled any in the world north of Mexico. This was Cahokia, the paramount centre of the Mississippian culture that flourished from about 1050 to 1350 CE. At its zenith, it was a sprawling metropolis covering nearly 6 square miles, home to 10,000 to 20,000 people, a population not matched in the United States until Philadelphia in the late 18th century. Its skyline was dominated by over 120 earthen mounds, the largest of which, Monk's Mound, rises in 4 terraces to a height of 100 feet, containing over 22 million cubic feet of earth, all moved by hand in woven baskets. Then, by the 14th century, the city was largely empty. Its grand plaza fell silent, its charnel houses closed, its carefully aligned wood henges ceased to mark the equinox sun. What signal, perceived in the movement of the stars or the failing of the soil, prompted the orderly yet definitive abandonment of this powerful, prosperous city? The mainstream anchor for Cahokia is the monumental landscape itself, preserved today as the Cahokia Mound State Historic Site. Monk's Mound is the largest prehistoric earthen construction in the Americas. Its size and central placement speak of a society capable of mobilizing a vast labor force under a concentrated, likely theocratic authority. The Grand Plaza, a vast leveled expanse covering nearly 50 acres at the foot of Monk's Mound, was the civic and ceremonial heart, capable of holding thousands for rituals and gatherings. Nearby, archaeologists discovered the remnants of Woodhenge, a circle of massive cedar posts used as a solar calendar, aligning with the equinox sunrise as viewed from Monk's Mound. This was a city deeply attuned to celestial cycles, its very layout a mirror of a cosmic order. Cahokia was the nexus of a vast interaction sphere, often called the Mississippian Ideological Interaction Sphere, or simply the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex. Goods and ideas flowed along the river highways. Distinctive shell-tempered pottery, long-nose god masks, embossed copper plates, and finely crafted flint clay pipes depicting otherworldly beings, like the famous Birdman figure. The city's influence is seen in the adoption of its mound building and artistic styles at distant sites like Spiro in Oklahoma and Moundville in Alabama. Yet Cahokia itself shows little evidence of being a militaristic, expansionist empire. Its power seems to have been ideological and economic, a place of pilgrimage, trade, and profound ritual that drew people in and sent cultural concepts radiating outward. The question of Cahokia's end has long dominated its study. There is no evidence of a sudden, catastrophic invasion. Instead, the archaeology points to a gradual, century-long process of depopulation and cultural change beginning around 1200 CE. Key theories focus on environmental strain. A period known as the Little Ice Age brought cooler, wetter conditions that could have caused catastrophic flooding of the Mississippi bottomlands, ruining the maize agriculture that fed the dense urban population. Deforestation for building and fuel would have caused erosion and depleted local resources. Analysis of human remains shows increasing signs of malnutrition and infectious disease in the later periods, indicating a society under severe physiological stress. Scholars still debate whether these environmental pressures were the primary cause or merely exacerbating factors in a social and ideological collapse. Could the very cosmology that built Cahokia have contained the seeds of its dissolution? The city's layout was a sacred map, with the central mounds representing a tiered universe. If repeated environmental disasters, failed harvests, floods, were interpreted as the cosmos falling out of balance, faith in the priestly elite who mediated that balance could have crumbled. The social contract based on the ruler's ability to ensure harmony and abundance may have broken. In this light, the abandonment was not a retreat, but an ideological diaspora, as people lost faith in the centre and returned to smaller, more sustainable, and perhaps less rigidly hierarchical ways of life. A curious, lesser-known detail that provides a haunting, intimate glimpse into Cahokia's final century is the beaded burial in Mound 72. This burial contained two high-status individuals on a platform of thousands of shell beads, surrounded by the remains of over 50 young women, likely sacrificed to accompany them in death. Nearby, a separate pit held 4 headless and handless men. This gruesome testament to elite power and ritual violence is from Cahokia's peak, around 1100 CE. However, later burials show a decline in such lavish sacrificial practices. Some researchers interpret this not as a softening, but as a sign of weakening authority. The later elites could no longer command such an ultimate demonstration of their power. The fading of this extreme ritual could be a symptom of the social unravelling that preceded the physical abandonment of the city. Cahokia did not vanish without a trace, it vanished into traces. Its people likely dispersed and joined or founded smaller Mississippian chiefdoms downriver. Their knowledge of mound building, astronomy and artistry persisted in places like Moundville and Etua for another 2 centuries. But the grand, unifying project that was the city itself was over. By the time European explorers and missionaries travelled the Mississippi in the 16th and 17th centuries, the mounds were overgrown, and the local Illinois people, who called them Cahokia, could only say they were built by a race of giants from a distant past. The civilization had so completely receded from memory that its greatest achievement was attributed to myth. Cahokia's silent mounds stand as a testament to the fact that in the Americas, just as across the oceans, urban civilization could rise to staggering heights, experiment with social complexity, and then choose, or be compelled, to walk away, leaving its monuments not as ruins of defeat, but as quiet, earthen questions on the landscape. Conclusion. The silence that follows the final story is not an empty one. It is thick with the echoes of choices made, environments challenged, and identities reshaped. From the painted labyrinth of Knossos to the earthen geometry of Cahokia, the 15 narratives traced here are not simply tales of loss. They are chronicles of human ambition in dialogue with the limits of its world. Whether those limits were a sinking water table, a shifting monsoon, a frozen river, or the fragile bonds of a shared belief, these vanishings challenge our linear perception of history as a march of progress. They reveal instead a landscape of experiments in complexity, each brilliant in its adaptation, each ultimately contingent. A civilization is not a permanent edifice, but a sustained conversation, between people and their leaders, between farmers and their climate, between traders and the distant source of wealth. When the conversation falters, when the terms change too drastically, the civilization can cease to be, its participants melting back into the earth or merging into new patterns. The modern curiosity that drives us to uncover these lost worlds is, in a way, an attempt to resume that conversation. To look at a symbol stone from Pictland or a terracotta head from Knock is to acknowledge that our current moment is not the only possible outcome of the human story. These silent testimonies remind us that the threads of culture, language, and memory are both astonishingly durable and heartbreakingly fragile. They left not because they failed, but because their time, Their particular alchemy of place and people and purpose reached its end. And in contemplating their quiet exits, we are left to ponder the most enduring question of all: what conversations sustain our own world, and what would remain of us if one day they too were to fall silent?